Alrighty, thank you all so much for joining. We're so appreciative of the attention you're lending to this wonderful session. This is our kickoff session within this professional development conference track. My name is Kier Johnson Reyes. I'm an Osage Nation tribal member. I'll introduce myself traditionally. Hawe Lashe Mita Niu Konchkatsi Shohanka. We're really appreciative of our hosts and our sponsors. I want to give a little bit of a shout out. This session is sponsored by our Champions of Native Agriculture sponsors, as well as University of Arizona Native Nations Institute on behalf of the Harvard Project and NNI. So this session will be structured as a panel. We have 5 of our exceptional Native graduate student fellows who are participating in IEC's inaugural interinstitutional network for food, agriculture, and sustainability / Intertribal Agriculture Council graduate fellowship program. It's a year-long graduate student fellowship, and the representatives here on our session today are 5 of the 11 who have been selected across the country, whose work in indigenous food systems is really at the cutting edge of Indian country's agricultural movement within the academic realm. And so we're really appreciative to have them all here. We have Leslie Hutchins, who's a second-year PhD student in environmental studies, environmental policy, science and management at the University of California, Berkeley. Alicia Orloff, first-year Master's of Science student, School of Forestry and Environmental Science at Yale University. Clifton Cottrell, second-year PhD student, School of Public Policy, University of Maryland. Ariel Quintana, first-year Master's of Science student in Human Dimensions of Natural Resources, Colorado State University in Fort Collins. And Marie Richards, third-year PhD student in Social Sciences at Michigan Technical University. So we're so appreciative to have everyone online with us today, and like to go ahead and get straight into our session. So each of our panelists will have 2-minute response times to cover three topic areas, or actually, 3 questions pertaining to a variety of topic areas. And so we'll go ahead and start right off the top with Leslie Hutchins. And this question will be for everybody. Please discuss the nexus of agriculture and food systems present in your research and how you became involved in this field of work. Go ahead, Leslie.
Aloha, everyone, and thank you, Kier. So my work is really looking at Hawaiian food sovereignty and really trying to understand how values affect what farmers do here in Hawaii, where I do my research. And so what I do is I interview farmers. I ask them what they grow, why they grow it, and where they sell their crops. And I'm also looking at sort of how that's been affected by COVID and sort of trying to tease out what sort of values lead to more resiliency in our local food system in Hawaii. And also, I'm really interested in ecological dimensions of the food system as well. And soon I'm going to start a project sort of collecting insects from our traditional ag systems here in Hawaii. And I'm trying to understand sort of how insects are able to sort of persist within these ag systems and thrive in comparison to the non-traditional Hawaiian ag systems. And I really got involved in this work sort of in my junior year of high school. I became really interested in the environment at that time. I started going hiking for the first time, and I really started to become involved in some of these conservation organizations in Hawaii. But I soon realized that you know, there weren't a lot of Hawaiian people in this field, at least leading it. So then I started looking at some of these local nonprofits in Hawaii that were involved in agriculture, and I seen a lot of Hawaiian people in those fields or in sort of this ag field, and I seen this place for me and for my culture, and sort of this place where I could conduct research with Hawaiian culture in mind, and sort of, yeah, that's sort of how I ended up studying agriculture.
Thank you so much. Same question for Alicia. Would you like me to repeat it or you ready to go?
Good. Hello, everybody. Again, my name is Alicia. And my master's thesis focuses kind of similarly, like Leslie, on how agriculture in Hawaii and traditional ecological knowledge of wetlands is translated into the landscape of how these land managers and farmers are shaping different habitats. And this project is specifically situated within a larger conservation concern of endangered native and endemic waterbird species. And so I'm coming from more of a quantitative scientific background, looking at the different structure of vegetation in these wetlands, and doing waterbird surveys to see how the populations are interacting with these spaces. And so kind of the overarching management idea is that lo'i kalo, which are wetlands that are used to grow kalo, are utilizing traditional practices and techniques to maintain wetlands that serve as a conservation effort, but also provide food for communities and local peoples. And so I got involved in this intersection of traditional ecological knowledge and food systems in maybe my junior year of undergrad. Because I'm from Seattle, Pacific Northwest, there have been a lot of connections and relations that scientists have made to communities in that area. And I had been kind of just involved in different efforts around the US, kind of engaging traditional knowledge with conservation work, just because with food in Native communities, it's so entwined that these are kind of inseparable concepts. And so, yeah, that has led me here, and I'm really appreciative of my work with this community.
Thank you so much. Clifton.
Sione Gada. Hello, everyone. I am Clifton Cottrell. In terms of how I've gotten into food and agricultural work, the main focus, the center of my research is indigenous climate resilience. And as I continue to dig deeper and deeper into this issue, there's more and more evidence that keeps kind of piling up on me about how it's through securing our food pathways that we're really able to build these resilient communities to climate change. And so there's been kind of this natural symbiosis between the two topics, and I find myself more and more throughout my PhD work working on the side of particularly food security and policy as a way to kind of secure our future, both culturally, spiritually, environmentally, as tribes deal with climate change.
Thank you so much. Alrighty. See you next up. Ariel?
Kotse Sehopa. My name is Ariel Quintana. I'm calling in from Kuchiti Pueblo today. My research is really grounded in this belief that in order for Indigenous people to achieve a true future of food sovereignty, we need to have better access and ownership and governance over our reservation and ancestral lands. Every tribe in the US has ancestral land that falls outside of reservation boundaries. And unfortunately, here in the Southwest, majority of the time, we have very limited to no rights over the governance and ownership and management of those landscapes. And so what I'm really interested in is understanding how co-stewardship, shared stewardship can be achieved between public land agencies and tribes here in the Southwest to, one, address the true need to have for tribes to have ownership and sovereignty over those lands, and also to really demonstrate how returning Indigenous stewardship practices back on the landscape needs to be the future. That needs to happen in order for us to continue to move forward, in order for us to sustain our resources, and in order for us as Indigenous peoples to continue our traditional food, to reclaim actually our traditional food pathways. And so what I'm really interested in is really wanting to reclaim the food sovereignty of Pueblo people here in the Southwest, and demonstrating that how that is inextricably connected to the landscape. And so for me, this work started a very long time ago. Born and raised on the reservation, and grew up being outside with my dad, who would show me all these different places on the reservation and abroad, and the ways in which we are connected to the landscape and the way in which we identify with the landscape. And that's being able to grow my own food, being able to go to traditional and cultural sites throughout the reservation, and even in ancestral lands, is what's really started all of this, the need and desire to protect and steward those landscapes.
Thank you so much. Marie?
Anine bonjour. I'm Marie Richards. I'm joining you all from Bawating, known by its colonial name as Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, in the Upper Peninsula. So my research over at Michigan Tech focuses on the changes in our traditional cultural landscape surrounding our food systems. We have a lot of community members in the region that still, utilize traditional resources in a way for like food and everything, our fisheries and such. And that was all by design, our ancestors when they were signing the treaties. But there were a lot of changes from the industrialization of the Upper Peninsula. The lumber industry started coming in, the mines, the lumber to supply those mines, the limestone industry. All these changes were happening, and everybody in our communities were making decisions based off of, food sources and everything else, and ultimately making things available for us. So to understand that resiliency and how our communities survived all of that, food systems has become a very critical way to understand that, because that's still an issue that we're dealing with today. And I became involved with it because I'm trained as a historical archaeologist and ethnographer, and I worked on several projects in other parts of the country where food sources and natural resources were kind of like shuffled to the side as part of cultural resource management. And more of my colleagues are starting to refer to it as heritage resources. So this is one way of bringing it together and helping to illustrate to people outside our communities what we already know and understand, that through our teachings and everything, this is how we've been resilient. But yeah, so it's really just to help explain that more. I think that's a missing connection in a lot of things.
So thank you so much. Alrighty, so next question, and we'll have two more questions, and then we can ease up on the structure a little bit and maybe have a little bit more discussion as time allows. Thank you all so much for lending your perspective and experience, and where your research kind of aligns with the foodways and food systems elements of our cultures and communities. What learnings, teachings, cultural values can you impart around navigating academic and family or community responsibilities? What advice do you have for American Indian, Alaska Native, Pacific Islander students uh, who are considering graduate school? So again, we'll start at the top. Leslie, go ahead.
Yeah, so I would say I have maybe 3 bits of advice. My first one is, you might travel far as a student to be in whatever environmental program you end up in. For instance, I'm 2,500 miles away from my own community. But even though you are far away, you need to make sure you maintain that responsibility to your community and hold yourself accountable to them. Um, I feel like as Indigenous students, we often join these programs in order to help uplift our communities, but sometimes if we're very far away, we can maybe lose sight of that. So just make sure to always ground yourself back in that responsibility to your community. Secondly, I would say you need to recognize the conflict between values that you'll experience in academia. You'll want to, of course, as we were just saying, benefit your community and sort of tend to culture. But academia at the same time requires you to do a lot of things involved with research and going to conferences and trying to publish papers. And so you need to, manage this conflict of interest and make sure you, stay grounded, but also get your things done in academia. Uh, and lastly, I would say, you know, while you're at this new institution, you need to carve out sort of your own space and find your own new community while you're there. It's really hard being isolated in academia. Academia is lonely enough, so make sure you find good friends and good mentorship, and don't get, lost in the ivory tower.
Thank you so much. Alicia.
Yeah, I wanted to mainly hit on the second point because I think one of my experiences and the challenges that I had was to accept the responsibility of going to an incredibly oppressive colonial institution and acknowledging the legacies that that has. And I know just talking with a lot of different people there also that there was this kind of like dissonance, like this internal dissonance about going to these spaces and being able to have your identity and your culture supported within these spaces. And I think something that I wanted to emphasize is that while a lot of people recognize the contribution that our institutions have to us, being confident that we are giving just as much and contributing just as much knowledge and perspective back into these institutions, and having the courage and the strength to kind of be present in those areas is definitely a sacrifice that we have to take if we choose to make those decisions, and that it's definitely hard, like Leslie was saying, being alone, but recognizing that if we do reach out and if we do find individuals that can support us, both financially, but also mentally, culturally, and spiritually, there are individuals out there, no matter how isolated we feel.
Thank you so much. Clifton?
Yeah, so growing up, college was always kind of treated in my hometown as a way to escape the Indian life, as a way to get away from that. And my family kind of took this very different approach, and it's one I've tried to use as my daughters are growing, and that's, involve your family and your community within that journey, within that process. Some people refer to that nowadays as indigenizing our education system, and it's a way to stay grounded and connected with your family, with your community, and really make sure that you stay true to your roots as you enter institutions and systems that aren't necessarily created for us as students, that you're able to thrive within those systems. And so I've found that not treating it as an escape from life, but as a way to kind of take a different path and still be able to support and contribute to my own community. It's made it kind of very fulfilling on my end, and then kind of in more of a kind of life school balance, because lots of us in graduate school are maybe a little older and a little further removed from our times as high schoolers or even as undergraduates. And so, now I have a wife, kids, all of that. I found that involving them, especially my two daughters, throughout this entire process has been incredibly important and rewarding, in a way to both kind of enhance and progress their cultural knowledge and mine. And so including them in my projects, my third grader is sitting behind the camera here, doing her own schooling right now and getting to listen to all these wonderful stories from my fellows. And so it's great for her to get to see that out of others as well, and know that although at times we might feel very isolated where we are, there's many of us, and programs like this through IAC are ways that we get to connect with each other and find new ways to grow our own communities.
I appreciate it. Thank you for sharing that. Ariel?
Thank you. This is my first semester as a graduate student, and it has been very difficult. And I feel like something that I've really learned from this first semester is to have patience, and not only patience for others, people who I'm working with, fellow classmates who I work with on group projects, but also patience with myself, and to be gentle to yourself also. This year is hard for a lot of different reasons. We have a lot of grad students right now who are taking classes virtually. Fellows who are parents who have to take care of kids. Fellows like myself who actually watch over and take care of my grandparents. There's a lot of responsibilities that each of us have when we're calling in from home. And it is a completely different format that we're not used to. And it's so easily to beat yourself up over not being able to be there for your kids or being able to be there for your family when you're physically in the home because of all the work that is required and demanded in a graduate program. And it's so easy to lose sight of that. And it's so easy to be hard on yourself for not being able to do everything and do everything that you want, and also do it in the way and manner in which you'd like to. And I'm slowly learning to not be so hard on myself when I have to let responsibilities go. I had to be okay with stepping back at my work. I had to be okay with stepping back in some of the committees that I serve on, to be able to just focus on school, which has always been a priority for myself and my family, and also to focus on my family. And that's okay. It is okay to take a step back. It is Western culture that teaches us that we should stretch ourselves thin, and that's not true. There is a support network there for us, and that is what we are taught here in Coaching, and that's what we're taught here in Indigenous communities. It takes takes the whole village to be able to live a really good and healthy life, and to always be mindful of that spiritual side of yourself, and to be okay with valuing your own time. And so in terms of advice, if you're considering going to grad school, for me, what I really had to do was, what I'd really say is go for it. It's never gonna feel like the right time. And if it does feel like the right time, then you're lucky. I had so many things coming up this year that told me not to do it, that told me not to start grad school. But that's always going to come up. You are always going to have responsibilities at home, to your people, to your family. But it's time for you to take that step for yourself and to pursue this education. And so be brave, take the step forward, and let the pieces fall where they.
Thank you so much for the advice. Marie?
Yeah, I think what's helped me a lot has been turning to the teachings to help me with guidance for dealing with stress and creating a healing space. Just the number of universities I've gone through in my academic career, some of those relationships have been toxic. I think everybody's had instances one way or another for that, and learning to embrace those teachings really helped. And then also, because at university you have an opportunity to meet people from other places, that exchange that we have with each other, we all learn from each other in different ways and everything. So the other step is building up that community on campus, because we are often away from our home communities and we have to create that community. And one thing I encountered at one institution while creating that community is the nature of the relationship between professors and students, and the way that we'd be disregarded as, oh, you're just students, you don't know any better. And I had to take the time to reflect on it. And I pointed out to them, we're members of our community. You want to engage and do research and work with our communities, and we're here. They hear how you're treating us back home and everything that gets to them. So you have to build that relationship with us too, not just, going back to our communities and using our communities for research, but genuinely doing that. And that changed the relationship, where some people understood why I would stress out building this campus community, because I wish I had more of one as an undergrad and at one of my grad schools versus now. And others were just like, all right, I'm done with you. And that's hard, but I had to look back at the teachings to again realize, like, that's about them and their relationship with everything. And it's really hard to not take that personally, sort of thing. So, create that space for yourself and take that time to center, or however you go about it, and build up that community with each other, and maintain connections back home. I know it's not always easy. One of my colleges, I was 1,200 miles away, and now the past few years I've only been like 2 hours of drive, 5 hours sometimes. But those quips of joining in virtually, connecting with friends back home, that helped so much. And I wish I had done that sooner and had those connections sooner, but I had to work on them. I guess that would be my big advice, is just lifting up what everyone else said with, building up campus community.
Appreciate it. All right, so our last structured panel question: discuss your personal process around building a strong and supportive network that you applied to your work in Indian country's food and agricultural sectors. And I'll turn this back over to Leslie.
I think in terms of sort of building up a network or community on the ground in Hawaii is, I tend to go to, let's say, community work days that different organizations host, because it's good to, just be on the ground and see what people are doing, catch up with old friends that you haven't seen in a while, or make new friends. And it's really good to just learn, sort of what's going on in that moment in time, in the sort of food system world, wherever you're doing your work. And it's just really fun too to be outside and get your hands dirty. And in academia itself, I really like reaching out to different professors and grad students on campus. I'd say, yeah, it's probably how I've been able to meet different people studying things that may not seem related to what I'm doing, but actually are very related. So I really love, yeah, just sort of, emailing someone and saying, this is who I am and this is what I'm doing. Can we meet? Or just, showing up to, let's say like a meeting for a certain club on campus or whatnot. So that's sort of what I do.
Thank you so much. Alicia.
So I think for this project specifically, I kind of had a rocky road at the beginning. And I think it's unfortunate that I had this experience, but I wanted to share that starting off, having these values of wanting to do community-based work and place-based work, I went into my department knowing that there wasn't going to be really a space for me, but that I still needed to have the confidence to pursue work that engages communities and peoples. And I was told by my advisor at the beginning that I was being too ambitious, and that kind of set me off a little bit, especially as a woman. Like I do not like those words. And so I knew like right off the bat that it wasn't going to be a good fit. And I really wasn't going to stand for that kind of behavior. And so I reached out to various different individuals at the department, trying to see if there was going to be a better advisor for me, a better mentor for me during my time there. And luckily, when I went to the dean, she said that there was a professor that just got approved to mentor students. So I was super lucky that she had no other students before me, and she was just a research associate with the department. But the fact that I was able to find an Indigenous scholar, not necessarily in the food realm, but just a mentor for me during that time of development was really important. And another piece of advice, finding female mentors, if you are a female student, is so important. Just being able to kind of have those role models and that encouragement and that empathy for where you are in life and what your experiences are in academia is so important.
Thank you. Clifton.
Yeah, it's important to remember as you navigate graduate school, college in general, that to use an agricultural term, departments can be very siloed, and so your home base, where your degree comes from, that can often be one narrow interpretation of how to address all of the world's biggest problems, and that can be pretty antithetical to how a lot of us grew up, where we're used to seeing these very holistic, encompassing approaches to solving issues. And so the best way I've found to combat the siloing is to do just like Leslie was saying, go out and see what others are doing. You know, there's lots of talks and clubs and opportunities like this fellowship where you really get to see what a lot of other people are doing to attack these problems. And to give a quick little story of one kind of neat way that's worked out with me, I've got a good friend who's a PhD student in microbiology, and he spends most of his times modeling the interactions between enzymes and plant roots, which is kind of a unique thing, and not something particularly related to what I do. But we got to talking, and I'm talking to him about, concerns over, diminished access to resources and culturally important foods that we'll have as climate change stress becomes stronger and stronger. And we got to talking, and it's like, one kind of strategy against that is sharing knowledge. And so now he and I are working on a new model that kind of shows how communities can share knowledge about important foods and resources with each other as kind of a way to help adapt to climate change. And it was one of those partnerships, relationships that, initially it wondered why we were even talking to each other. And then the more we talk, the more you realize you can share with each other and build. And that's really what it's going to take is these community approaches to these big problems like climate change or food sovereignty. And so college can be a wonderful opportunity to go out and really find those other members of your community that you're going to need in the long term to fix these issues. And so that's, a great way to kind of get past the siloing that a lot of people encounter when they first enter graduate school.
Much appreciated. Thank you. Ariel?
For me, I've always been passionate about, doing a project that would directly benefit my community and the surrounding public communities. That has always been where my interests has lied. I knew that whenever I chose to go to grad school, whenever I chose to start, that my project would be for the people. And it would be to improve our lives in whatever way that needed to look like. And so going in already having that understanding and already having the desire to, create these, to create a community-led and organized project, I right away from the beginning, when I was searching for advisors in grad school, had let people know when I was talking with them that that was my intention. And thankfully for me, for the people who I reached out to, they were very receptive to that. Because it is becoming, especially when you're working with Indigenous communities, it is becoming quite obsolete to do anything but community-based projects. And it is so important to have Indigenous voices, Indigenous leaders carving the way for those types of research projects. And so for me, thankfully, I was able to find an advisor who isn't necessarily Indigenous herself. She is Latina. But she does have a history of working with Indigenous tribes, both in Alaska and in South America. And so finding someone who understands that and who is willing to change the system with you, because what you're going to find is that in academia, there's a certain way to do things already. And there's certain expectations that some of our more established professors have on the way to conduct research. And sometimes they're unwilling to change. And for me, thankfully, that is not true. For when I'm brainstorming with my advisor on ways to conduct my research, she's very open to hearing alternative ways to doing this type of work, and what methods and approaches are going to be most applicable and most appropriate for my own community. Because as we know, even though we like to use the blanket term Indigenous, each of our tribes here in the US has a very distinct way of doing things. and there's distinct customs, there's this distinct culture, distinct values that we need to be respectful towards, that we need to be aware of, and that we need to be able to incorporate into our research when we're working with these communities. And so for me, that's been the most important. And because I come from Cochiti, because I am Pueblo, I already have that understanding. I grew up in the culture, grew up with friends who come from all these other Pueblos. I work for a nonprofit right now that's actually seeking to build those relationships with those tribes. And so I'm very much inserted into the community. And I'd say that that's what's most valuable. And that's the piece that people find most, that's what I'm finding to be the most helpful, because out of anyone else can come in and try to do a research project, but when it's by our own people, and when it's coming from really good intentions, that can't be matched to anyone else. And so what I really encourage you all to do is to conduct research, be that voice, be that scholar for your own people, for other communities in your region, because we know what we're doing. We know best how to do this type of work.
Ariel might have just cut off there. I would really appreciate what you're sharing. Due to time, we'll go ahead and move to Marie.
Yeah, so my kind of personal process, I was known as the department frog during one of my masters. I would just like hop around from little social group, those little silos, and talk to everybody, sort of a thing. So we all knew each other. And I think that's one of the longest lasting thing for me, has been, having those little conversations and making it personal, and the whole, okay, if we're going to work together, we have to have a personal working relationship. Doesn't mean we have to be friends. But we need to be able to work together. And so kind of, I still do this hopping around thing, even working for my tribe's government. Now I hop around talking to different people in different departments around there. And a lot of that is thinking about a network as, thinking of it like a spider web, or one social justice organization I work with likes to describe it as a snowflake. You have all these little nodes and things go out and they connect back, and then, the same thing with that web. And I apply that to, pretty much everything, my personal, professional, academic relationships and everything. Is really building that and taking that time. And one time I described it to my advisor, I was like, and working with, looking at the history of extractive industries, like academia and research can be pretty extractive at times. And, being able to be brutally honest. And that's part of that, building that relationship with people, to be pointing out to them, okay, now you're data mining, you're not building this relationship, you're not listening to the knowledge, you're just looking for data to extract it. But yeah, ultimately thinking of it as that web, and just applying that to everybody, and all keeping the social frog until they close off the door to me, or I see their boundaries of, oh, I gotta hop back. But yeah, so that's just what I keep doing, is just building those personal relationships, and I'm applying it to food as well.
Thank you so much, Marie, and to everybody. It's been a wonderful session. I'd invite you all to unmute if you can. A couple questions that come in, and I think just due to time, we're going to need to, combine them. The first one is, I guess, like number one learning that's come out of just the process of engaging in grad school. So you probably maybe touched on that already, but something that maybe something that leaps to mind along those lines. And we can just popcorn this, because we got like 5 minutes left or so in this session. So if something comes to mind there. And then also a little bit more on the structure and your experience with the IC and FAST fellowship program. So those are a couple things, and feel free to respond in any way, shape, or form or fashion you like on those fronts.
Can you repeat the first question again?
Let's see. Basically like a number one, like aha, or like a number one learning that came out of just transcending into graduate school.
I think for me, something that I wasn't expecting is how receptive this generation of graduate students is in some of our different programs. And that was not what I was expecting at all. I was expecting to have to fight tooth and nail to help people understand, the ways in which traditional Western science and research, how that is really extractive and really damaging to Indigenous communities. I expected to have to fight to share how important it is to return and do Indigenous stewardship to the land. And to have to really fight to just help people understand, the perspective that Indigenous people hold in these spaces. That hasn't been my experience. And that's been a really, and people have been like really receptive and asking more questions like, well, how do I do this? How should I start to incorporate that? And that's awesome to hear that from, non-natives, especially in academia. And so I'd say that's not everyone's experience straight off the bat. That has been mine. And I'd just say that however you encounter those types of situations, to be mindful of yourself, because it's so easy to get stuck down this rabbit hole of trying to teach others how to work with Indigenous communities. And that's not necessarily your responsibility as a graduate student.
Thanks so much. Alrighty. Anybody else? Either of those two components of the questions?
I think for me, it was learning that moment of, I'm not obligated to do all the heavy lifting for others to learn, to just ping off of what Ariel said there. You can give people like steps and directions to go look, but it's not your job to sit there and teach them everything about our culture or ways to do it better. It's, just kind of shove them over to the right direction. They're all intelligent people who can hopefully do the work themselves, but you're not obligated to do the heavy lifting. You're already doing heavy lifting with research and learning to be that researcher. So
I think another thing that I've encountered, kind of just going off of what was previously said, is that now that I will have a graduate degree, compared to a lot of people in my family who don't, all of a sudden there's like this higher level expectation of where I'm going to be in life, what I'm going to do, and the decisions I'm going to make. But I'm coming to terms with the fact that, especially within the environmental field, there are very gloom and doom messages, but it's not solely your responsibility to address all these different concerns, but engaging different people on these issues and allowing people to all take in that responsibility is really important.
Anybody else? Got another minute or so?
I would just say that, yeah, this fellowship has been great in terms of both financial support and also just building community with, other graduate students across Turtle Island. And having experiences like this has been awesome.
Great. Yeah. Well, we're so appreciative of your time and efforts today. All the panelists, thank you for imparting all the wisdom that you cultivated through your process of navigating yeah, the intricacies that come with being Indigenous, being in academia, really forging new pathways for your families, your communities. And we're just really appreciative to have you as part of our inaugural cohort. And yeah, it's just something that we hope Intertribal Agriculture Council and our partners are able to continue to offer year after year. And yeah, well, you'll always have a special place in our heart as our first bunch. And it's been wonderful working with you all. And so that wraps up our time. We're really appreciative of all the participants, and just to provide this little perspective that this live stream will be come a recording, and so all the 1,000+ participants of our annual conference will have access to all recorded materials, including this wonderful session. And so this will be something that beyond just today's session will help to inform people moving forward. So we really appreciate your time and effort again. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and continue to engage with our host of amazing offerings. Again, 7 conference tracks, 40 some odd workshops between today and tomorrow. So definitely wanting to welcome everybody to continue to participate and pick and choose across all of our different topic areas. Without anything else pinging in front of me, I'm going to go ahead and close this session. And again, thank you all for joining. Alrighty.